The summer heat in Missouri is brutal thick. Suffocating air clings to everything, slowing down time itself. The air hums with the sound of cicadas, the earth cracked from the relentless sun. The smell of damp soil and decaying plant life lingers in the breeze, but on that morning in June, there was something else in the air, something foul. The farmer didn't expect to find anything unusual in his fields that morning just outside West Alton. He had driven this route countless times, his boots crunching against the dry gravel shoulder of the road. But as he walked along the edge of the cornfield, something caught his eye. At first, it looked like discarded clothing tangled in the weeds, maybe a pile of rags dumped by the roadside. But as he stepped closer, a wave of nausea rose in his stomach. It wasn't trash, it was a body. The remains lay just beyond the road, partially obscured by tall grass and thick brush. The stench of decomposition hit the farmer immediately, a sickly, putrid odor that clung to the hot air. He staggered back, his breath hitching. The skin was darkened, bloated beyond recognition. The body looked as though it had been left there for weeks. But that didn't make sense, because the man lying dead in that field, Ricky McCormick, had only been missing for 3 days. How could he have decayed so fast? That was the first mystery, but it wouldn't be the last. Ricky McCormick wasn't the name that made headlines. If you passed him on the street, you probably wouldn't have looked twice. He was quiet, reserved, the kind of man who kept to himself. He was born and raised in Missouri, but life had never been easy for him. He had dropped out of high school, struggling with severe learning disabilities that left him barely able to read or write. He wasn't book smart, but he had a mind that worked in its own way, complex, unpredictable. And then there were the notes. Ricky had a habit of scribbling things down, filling scraps of paper with strange symbols, letters, and numbers. His family had seen them for years, but they never understood them. Some thought it was just a quirk, a harmless habit. Others weren't so sure. He bounced between low-paying jobs, doing whatever he could to get by. Sometimes he worked at gas stations, pumping fuel and sweeping floors. Other times he disappeared for days without explanation, only to return like nothing had happened. But despite his struggles, he wasn't homeless. He wasn't a drifter. He had people in his life, family, friends, even a girlfriend. He had a history, a past, a routine. And then, suddenly, that routine ended. His body was found miles away from anywhere he was known to frequent. No one could explain how he got there. No one knew who had last seen him. So what was he doing in that field? And why was no one talking about what really happened to him? The area where Ricky McCormick's body was found didn't make sense. It wasn't near his home, his work, or any place he was known to visit. It was an isolated stretch of land near a cornfield, just off Highway 367 in St. Charles County, Missouri, a desolate spot where no one would have reason to stop. And yet, here he was. His body was found nearly 15 miles away from his last known location. Ricky didn't own a car. He had no history of hitchhiking. There were no bus stops nearby. So how did he get there? The ground around him was undisturbed. No footprints in the dirt. No tire tracks leading to the scene. No sign that he had crawled or stumbled there himself. It was as if someone had dropped him from the sky. And the condition of his body? That was even stranger. Ricky had only been missing for 3 days, but his remains told a different story. His skin was bloated, darkened by decay. His flesh had deteriorated far beyond what should have been possible in such a short time. Even in Missouri's brutal summer heat, the decomposition didn't add up. Had he been stored somewhere, hidden in a place where his body rotted faster than normal before being dumped? The medical examiner couldn't determine a clear cause of death. There were no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, no blunt force trauma. It was as if he had just stopped living. Police had no answers, no suspects, no reason why Ricky would be here. But then they searched his pockets, and that's when everything changed. Folded inside Ricky's jeans were two pieces of paper, crumpled but intact. At first, officers thought they might be receipts, maybe a note from a friend. But when they unfolded them, they saw something that sent a chill through the investigation. The pages were covered in code. Lines upon lines of seemingly random letters, numbers, symbols repeating sequences that didn't match any known language. It wasn't English, it wasn't Spanish, it wasn't anything recognizable. The symbols were written in Ricky's own hand, there was no doubt about that, but what did they mean? A personal message, coordinates, a warning. The notes looked deliberate, carefully arranged, too structured to be meaningless. And yet, no one, not his family, not his friends, not even expert codebreakers could decipher them. The officers stared at the papers, knowing they had stumbled onto something far bigger than a simple missing persons case. Because these weren't just scribbles. These were the final words of a dead man, and no one could understand them. At first, detectives dismissed the notes. A man like Ricky McCormick, poor, uneducated, with no history of espionage or secret dealings, what could he possibly be writing in code? The initial assumption was simple. Maybe these were just meaningless scribbles, the product of an overactive or troubled mind. Maybe they were nothing at all, but something wasn't right. Even if Ricky had learning disabilities, his notes weren't random. They followed patterns, letters, and numbers placed with intentional structure. The repetition of certain sequences suggested something more than nonsense. So, to be safe, police sent the notes to the FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit CRU, the same team that had cracked high-level ciphers used by criminals, mafia groups, and even foreign governments. If anyone could break the code, it was them. The FBI's top cryptographers went to work. Days passed, then weeks, then months, and then nothing. They couldn't break it. Not a single clue about what the message meant. No language match, no cipher key, no historical reference, nothing. This wasn't some backyard puzzle. The FBI had decrypted cartel messages, secret government communications, even codes from spies. But Ricky McCormick's handwritten notes, they were unbreakable. What kind of man writes something so complex, so indecipherable, that even the world's best codebreakers can't crack it? Unless, of course, it wasn't meant to be understood by them. Maybe the message was never meant for the FBI. Maybe it was meant for someone else. When the FBI eventually approached Ricky McCormick's family, they weren't shocked by the notes. He was always writing things down, his mother told investigators, but we never understood them. His relatives recalled how Ricky would often pull out scraps of paper and scribble on them, muttering to himself. They assumed it was a personal quirk, just something he did to keep his thoughts in order. But as the years passed, those scribbles started to look different. More structured, more intentional. His family had asked him before, what do these notes mean? He would only shrug. Never an answer. Never an explanation. Had they been looking at a secret code all along? And if so, was Ricky communicating with someone else? Or was he warning himself? Ricky McCormick wasn't as simple as he seemed. To most people, he was just another struggling man trying to get by. A high school dropout, an odd drifter, someone who kept to himself. But if you looked closer, there was something else, a pattern that hinted at a much darker reality. Ricky had a habit of disappearing for days at a time. He would leave without warning, without telling his family where he was going. And when he did return, his explanations were vague, almost rehearsed. He wasn't going on vacations. He wasn't visiting friends. So where was he going? Then his girlfriend revealed something that changed everything. She told police that Ricky wasn't just a lost soul wandering aimlessly. He was working, not at a gas station, not in some dead end job. Ricky was running packages for some dangerous people, drug dealers. Was he a courier? A middleman? Someone passing messages between groups that couldn't risk speaking openly? And if that was true, then what about the notes? What if they weren't just random scribbles? What if they were a secret form of communication? If Ricky was delivering something valuable, he wouldn't want just anyone to know. He would need a way to send and receive messages that only certain people could understand. And if those notes were meant for someone else, someone who never got them, then maybe Ricky had died before he could deliver his final message. Maybe those pages in his pocket were never meant to be found. The discovery of the coded notes changed everything. This wasn't just an unsolved murder anymore. It was a puzzle, a riddle that no one could crack. And speculation exploded. Some people believed Ricky was an informant, someone feeding information to the police or the FBI. Maybe he had gotten in too deep. Maybe the wrong people found out. And maybe he was silenced before he could talk. Others thought Ricky had stumbled onto something dangerous, something he wasn't supposed to know. Was he caught in the middle of something bigger than himself? The biggest theory, that the coded notes were instructions, a message meant for someone else. Maybe Ricky had been ordered to do something. Maybe the message contained coordinates or a name or a deal gone wrong. But here's the real question: was the message ever delivered? Or was it cut off before it could reach the right hands? And if so, who was meant to read it? Let's go back to something strange. Ricky McCormick had only been missing for 3 days, but when his body was found, it looked like it had been decomposing for weeks. That doesn't make sense. Even in Missouri's summer heat, a body doesn't decay that fast. Medical examiners are trained to estimate time of death based on biological factors, rigor mortis, insect activity, decomposition stages. And everything about Ricky's body was off. His skin was bloated, darkened. His features barely recognizable. His organs had deteriorated far beyond what should have been possible in 72 hours. It raised a chilling question: had Ricky really been dead for only 3 days? Or had he been killed somewhere else and stored under unnatural conditions before being dumped in that field? If so, why? Was someone trying to hide something? Here's another disturbing thought. If Ricky had been dead for longer than 3 days, then that meant someone had been lying about when he really disappeared. Had he been held captive before he died? Was he alive for longer than people assumed? And if he had been hidden, then the even bigger question is where? The location of Ricky's body was another mystery. This wasn't just some random roadside dumping ground. It was an isolated area far from his home, far from any place he was known to frequent. And there was one glaring problem: Ricky didn't drive. He didn't own a car. He had no history of renting one. There was no evidence that he had borrowed a vehicle from anyone. So how did he get there? Public transportation wasn't an option. There were no bus stops near the scene, no taxi services that would have dropped him off in such a remote area. That meant only one thing: someone had taken him there. Someone had driven him either before or after he was dead. But who? And more importantly, why? If Ricky had been killed somewhere else, why bring him here? What was it about this field, this spot, that made it the chosen location? Had his killer picked this place for a reason? Or was it just convenient? For 12 years, the FBI said nothing. They had Ricky McCormick's coded notes. They had the mysterious condition of his body. They had a crime scene that didn't make sense, and yet they kept it hidden. No public announcements, no pleas for information, no requests for help cracking the code. Just silence. That's not normal. When law enforcement is faced with an unsolved murder, especially one with a cryptic twist, they usually turn to the media. They ask the public for tips, offer rewards, anything to generate leads, but not in this case. For more than a decade, Ricky McCormick's death remained a buried secret locked away in FBI case files. No one outside law enforcement even knew decoded notes existed. Then, suddenly, in 2011, the FBI did something strange. They broke their silence. They uploaded Ricky McCormick's handwritten notes onto their website, announcing that their top cryptographers had failed to decode them. And they did something they rarely do. They asked the public for help. Why now? Why would the FBI sit on an unsolved code for over a decade before making it public? Had they exhausted every possible avenue? Had they run out of experts, resources, and decryption methods? Or were they hiding something? Think about it. If this was just a random case, why keep it secret? And if it wasn't random, what exactly did they know? Had someone inside the FBI recognized something in those notes, something too dangerous to share? Had they been waiting for someone else to come forward? Or was the release of the notes in 2011 a desperate last move away to flush out a suspect to see if anyone reacted to the public revelation? Because if Ricky's notes were a message meant for someone, that person would now know the world was looking. And if they were still out there, what would they do next? The moment the FBI released Ricky McCormick's notes to the public, the internet went wild. Amateur cryptographers, armchair detectives, and puzzle enthusiasts all saw the same thing, a challenge that no one had ever beaten. Reddit threads exploded with theories. Online forums dissected every line. Experts in pattern recognition, linguistics, and code breaking lined up, eager to be the first to solve what the FBI couldn't. People tried everything. Frequency analysis comparing letter and number patterns to known ciphers. Cryptographic algorithms testing whether Ricky's writing matched any existing encryption methods. Cross-referencing with known languages, searching for hidden words in different dialects. But no one could make sense of it. The letters and numbers didn't follow any known language structure. They didn't align with military ciphers, and unlike most codes, they didn't repeat in ways that suggested a traditional pattern. The strangest part. Many cryptography experts agreed this code wasn't random. There was logic behind it. There were repeating sequences, deliberate spacing, structured formatting. Someone had written this on purpose. But what purpose? And why did no one seem to have the key? As the weeks turned into months and no progress was made, a disturbing realization set in. If this was just nonsense, why would the FBI spend years trying to crack it? If Ricky was just a man with a habit of scribbling notes, why was his death treated with such secrecy? Theories exploded. Some believed Ricky McCormick was the victim of a hit job killed by people who knew he had dangerous information. Others thought he was silenced before he could reveal something big. But the most chilling possibility, what if this code was never meant to be solved? What if Ricky left behind a message meant to be found, a message that someone out there could still understand? And if that person ever reads it, will they finally step forward? Or will they make sure the truth stays buried forever? One of the most chilling theories was that Ricky McCormick wasn't just a man with a habit of writing strange notes, he was a courier. Drug rings in the Midwest were known for using coded messages to avoid wiretaps and law enforcement surveillance. Dealers didn't write down names or amounts in plain English. Instead, they used numeric sequences, letter combinations, and symbols just like the ones found in Ricky's pockets. His girlfriend had already hinted at his connection to drug dealers. She claimed Ricky was running packages for some very dangerous people. If that was true, then those notes might not have been personal thoughts or random scribbles. They might have been instructions. And if those instructions fell into the wrong hands, that could have sealed Ricky's fate. What if he lost a package? What if he messed up a delivery? What if he knew too much? Some believe Ricky wasn't killed because of who he was killed because of what he carried. And the notes in his pocket? They were never meant to be found. Then there were the stranger theories. Some believed Ricky McCormick was involved in something much bigger than drug running. Was he part of an intelligence operation? Could the codes be linked to government work, something that required secrecy? The idea sounds absurd. Ricky was a high school dropout who could barely read or write, but that's exactly why some people believe he might have been the perfect messenger. Someone no one would suspect, someone who wouldn't even know the full truth of what he was carrying. Then there were the skeptics. Some claimed the notes had nothing to do with his murder at all, just the ramblings of an unstable mind. But there was one huge problem with that theory. The FBI doesn't spend 12 years on meaningless scribbles. If those notes were just nonsense, law enforcement would have dismissed them immediately. They wouldn't have wasted time. They wouldn't have kept them secret. And they definitely wouldn't have gone public asking for help. So if the notes weren't meaningless, what were they hiding? There's one question that haunts this case more than any other. If anyone could crack Ricky McCormick's notes, would it solve the mystery of his death? Think about it. If the codes were truly a message, then they could reveal who killed Ricky, a name, initials, or an organization hidden in the text. Why he was dumped in that field, coordinates, a location tied to his final movements. What secret he was hiding, the real reason someone might have wanted him dead. It could all be right there, written in his own hand. But here's where things get even stranger. If these notes were the key to solving the case, why hasn't the FBI, one of the most powerful investigative agencies in the world, been able to crack them? Why hasn't a single linguist, mathematician, or cryptography expert made a breakthrough? And if the answer to Ricky's murder is locked inside those notes, who else might already know what they say? And what would they do to keep them secret? For all the mystery, the secrecy, the bizarre circumstances, there's one unbelievable fact about Ricky McCormick's case. His death was never officially ruled a homicide, despite a highly decomposed body found in an area Ricky had no known connection to. No clear cause of death, no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, no blunt force trauma. A history of suspicious disappearances and ties to dangerous people. 2 sheets of coded writing that no one has been able to crack. No arrests were ever made. No serious suspects were ever named. No real answers were ever given. It was almost as if someone didn't want the case solved. Was it because the truth was too dangerous to uncover? Or was this always meant to remain a mystery? Even today, more than 20 years later, Ricky McCormick's case remains ice cold. The coded notes, the condition of his body, the mystery of where he was in his final hours, none of it has ever been explained. And the deeper you look, the more disturbing the questions become. Who was Ricky McCormick really working for? Was he just a low-level courier? Or was he involved in something far bigger than anyone realized? What did the notes mean? Were they a message he left behind? Or were they instructions he never got the chance to follow? And why did the FBI suddenly need the public's help after keeping the case hidden for 12 years? Had they run out of leads? Or was something forcing their hand? There's something unnerving about how little we actually know. Ricky wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He didn't work in government intelligence. And yet, his final words remain one of the most unbreakable codes in FBI history, which means there are only two possibilities. Either Ricky's death was an accident, a tragic mystery that will never be solved, or someone somewhere already knows the truth. This case isn't just unsolved, it's one of the strangest, most frustrating puzzles in modern crime history. Because if the key to everything is in those coded notes, then the answer has been sitting right in front of us for more than 2 decades. So was this a perfect crime, one that will never be solved? Or is the truth still out there, buried inside those codes, waiting to be unlocked? And here's the real question. Could you be the one to solve it?